This narrative delves into a truly harrowing and often forgotten chapter of American true crime, a profound mystery shrouded in the shadows of history. The whispers of this particular case, though decades old, still carry an unsettling chill, a stark reminder of innocence violently taken. This account seeks to illuminate the dark corners of a story that profoundly impacted a nation's capital. This was a period when the very air in Washington, D.C., typically bustling with political fervor and ambition, grew heavy with an almost palpable dread. Throughout the early 1970s, a pervasive fear, like an insidious fog, began to creep through its vibrant neighborhoods and quiet cul-de-sacs. The city, known for its grand monuments and corridors of power, found itself gripped by a terror far more intimate and devastating, leaving an indelible scar of profound grief and a cascade of agonizing, unanswered questions that echoed through the marble halls and modest homes alike. The usual cacophony of city life, the distant sirens and the hum of traffic, seemed to take on a more sinister tone, a constant reminder of the lurking menace. The victims were 6 young black girls, their futures vibrant and brimming with unfulfilled potential, cruelly snatched away. Each abduction was a brutal violation, tearing a hole in the fabric of families and communities. Their innocent lives were extinguished with horrifying finality, their bodies later discovered callously discarded alongside the cold, unforgiving asphalt arteries that crisscrossed the nation's capital. These sprawling ribbons of highway, usually symbols of connection and journey, became grim, silent witnesses to unspeakable acts, their concrete expanses now forever stained by the memory of these tragic losses. The contrast between the mundane commute and the horrific discoveries amplified the shock and despair, intensifying the city's collective trauma. In their desperate attempts to categorize and comprehend such unfathomable evil, the press soon bestowed upon this elusive perpetrator a chilling, almost spectral moniker, the Freeway Phantom. This name, whispered in hushed tones, conjured images of a shadow figure, ghosting through the urban landscape, leaving only sorrow in his wake. Yet, to this very day, the true identity of this terrifying specter remains a profound enigma, a nameless menace. The chilling uncertainty persists: did he simply vanish into the ether, or did his reign of terror quietly extend beyond the known victims, a predator whose dark urges simply shifted, a phantom never truly apprehended? The question hangs heavy, a shroud over the city's past, casting a long, cold shadow. Beyond the cold statistics and the haunting appellation, this is, at its heart, the poignant and devastating chronicle of the vibrant, promising lives so cruelly and abruptly extinguished. It is a remembrance of the bright spirits dimmed, the dreams shattered, and the families irrevocably broken by the chilling acts of an unseen monster. Each girl was a universe of her own, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a future artist or scholar or leader, all stolen in the most brutal fashion, leaving an enduring void that decades cannot fill, a wound that time has yet to truly heal. Consider the final moments of a typical afternoon, perhaps the golden light filtering through a kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the linoleum floor as a young girl, full of the ordinary concerns of youth, is sent on a simple errand. A fleeting moment, a door closing, the innocent expectation of a swift return. Yet, as the clock hands inexorably turned, the shadows lengthened, and the gentle hum of the refrigerator became an unbearable silence, a stark and agonizing question began to form, a question that would echo through the decades with heartbreaking persistence: did she ever, in fact, make it to the store, or did an unknown horror intercept her path just beyond the threshold of her ordinary life? Her fate, like the killer's identity, remained suspended in a cruel, unresolved void. The initial flicker of concern, a subtle disquietude, began to manifest when Brenda failed to reappear within the expected timeframe that afternoon. As minutes stretched into an unnerving half-hour, the gentle hum of normalcy in their bustling home slowly morphed into an acute, gripping anxiety. Her mother, her heart already quickening with a mother's instinct, along with a scattering of other worried relatives, immediately abandoned their chores and conversations, spilling out onto the familiar neighborhood streets. The warm, late afternoon light, once comforting, now seemed to cast long, ominous shadows. They moved with a desperate urgency, their footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement as they began a frantic, door-to-door canvass of every house, every potential friend's dwelling, their voices growing hoarse from repeatedly calling out Brenda's name. Each polite shake of a head, each vacant gaze from a neighbor, each unanswered question deepened the pit of despair, confirming that no one, absolutely no one, had seen their beloved Brenda since she had left for that simple errand. The air, usually filled with the sounds of children playing and distant traffic, became heavy with unspoken dread, an almost suffocating silence settling over the anxious community. Meanwhile, as the family scattered like autumn leaves in a desperate wind, an entirely different, more insidious kind of storm was quietly gathering strength within the sanctity of their home. 7-year-old Bertha, Brenda's younger sister, had been left behind, her innocent mind not yet equipped to fully grasp the encroaching darkness of the situation. She sat perhaps on a worn sofa, surrounded by the familiar objects of home, a chipped coffee table, a faded rug, the television murmuring quietly in the background, a fragile island of childlike oblivion. Then, abruptly, the shrill, insistent ring of the telephone shattered the tense silence, jolting Bertha from her innocent reverie. She answered with the unthinking expectation of connecting with her mother or another searching relative, hoping for news, for reassurance. Instead, a disembodied, trembling voice, unmistakably Brenda's, crackled through the receiver, laced with an almost unbearable terror. "A white man picked me up," Brenda choked out between sobs, her voice barely a whisper, ragged with fear and exhaustion, "and I'm on my way home in a cab." The impossible words hung in the air, thick with an unsettling implication that defied all rational explanation. Then, in a chilling addendum that twisted Bertha's stomach into a knot, Brenda revealed, "And I'm in Virginia." Just as quickly as her voice had appeared, the connection severed, plunging Bertha back into a profound, echoing silence, the dial tone a mournful dirge in her ear. She stood there, the receiver still clutched in her small hand, a child burdened by an unimaginable, terrifying secret, utterly alone as her family returned home, their faces grim, unknowingly stepping into a fresh wave of terror that was about to break, a revelation that would forever alter the course of their lives. The gnawing fear that had already begun to insidiously twine itself around their hearts, a cold tendril of dread, suddenly mutated into something far more sinister, a palpable terror that seemed to suck all the air from the room. It was a suffocating realization that the unknown was not just lurking, but actively encroaching upon them. Then, with an almost theatrical timing, roughly 40 minutes after the initial, cryptic call, precisely at around 10 o'clock in the evening, the telephone's piercing ring once again sliced through the suffocating silence. This time, it was Retha's boyfriend who instinctively reached for the receiver, his hand perhaps trembling slightly. It was Brenda again, her voice a fragile, distant whisper against the hum of the static. He tried, with an increasing sense of urgency, to coax coherent details from her, to piece together the fragmented, almost nonsensical words tumbling from her lips. Once more, she reiterated the chilling claim, she had been picked up by a white man, and she was, inexplicably, on her way home in a taxi. Yet, each answer she offered only deepened the surrounding confusion, creating more questions than solutions. Her narrative simply did not align with any logical progression of events. When pressed about her location, specifically if she was still in Virginia, a long, agonizing pause stretched across the line, heavy with unspoken tension, before Brenda softly uttered, "No." Then, a question even more perplexing, more unsettling, slipped from her lips, "Did my mother see me?" The query was a bizarre non sequitur, leaving Retha's boyfriend utterly bewildered. See her where? What could she possibly mean? The silence that followed was not empty, it was thick, laden with an almost tangible sense of unseen presence. Distinct, heavy footsteps, deliberate and chillingly close, could be heard echoing from Brenda's end of the line, each thud against an unknown surface a hammer blow to the listener's heart. Brenda's final, haunting words, delivered with an unsettling casualness that belied the terror of her situation, were simply, "Well, I'll see you." And then, abruptly, the line went dead, leaving behind only the cold, impersonal hum of a disconnected call and a mind reeling with unanswerable questions. The chilling finality of those words, uttered just moments before the cutoff, hung like a pall. Just a few short hours later, as the inky blackness of night began its slow retreat before the encroaching dawn, marking the nascent hours of July 28, a solitary hitchhiker made a truly devastating, soul-shattering discovery. Traveling along the desolate stretch of U.S. Route 50 in the vast, wooded expanse of Prince George's County, Maryland, his eyes, scanning the roadside, fixated on an anomaly in the dim pre-dawn light. There, amidst the dew-kissed grass and discarded roadside debris, lay a sight that would forever haunt his waking thoughts and pervade his darkest nightmares, a grim tableau signaling the tragic end of a young life, an unspeakable horror waiting revelation. Lying in stark relief against the coarse gravel and faded asphalt of the roadside shoulder, a grim and silent tableau, was the small, lifeless form of a young black girl. It was Brenda. Her vibrant spirit, so recently filled with the innocent concerns of childhood, had been brutally extinguished. The cruel method was strangulation, a scarf, once perhaps a playful accessory, now a grim ligature still cinched mercilessly around her delicate neck, a chilling testament to her final moments. The scene, however, bore an unsettling distinction from the previous heinous discoveries. Unlike the careless, almost disdainful manner in which other victims' bodies had been discarded, Brenda's appeared to have been meticulously positioned, not merely abandoned. Her clothing remained undisturbed, remarkably intact, suggesting a deliberate preservation rather than a violent disarray. Her hands were carefully tucked beneath her body, almost as if she had been tenderly arranged for a final, macabre pose, a chillingly personal touch from the perpetrator. Even more confounding, her small feet were absolutely spotless, an inexplicable detail that immediately perplexed the seasoned investigators arriving at the scene. Initial reports suggested Brenda had left her home without shoes, a common enough occurrence for a child dashing out for an errand. Yet, for a young girl who would have undoubtedly traversed gritty city sidewalks, perhaps dusty patches of roadside, and various urban thoroughfares, her feet were inexplicably, unnaturally clean. This peculiar cleanliness was so striking that police began to entertain the unsettling hypothesis that her body had been thoroughly washed prior to its placement. Whatever twisted message the killer intended to convey, this deliberate staging, this meticulous arrangement of the scene, spoke volumes of a calculated, almost ritualistic intent rather than a panicked disposal. The precision of the act, the almost artistic arrangement of the body, suggested a chillingly intimate connection to the victim, or perhaps a desire to control the narrative even in death. Brenda's tragic death marked the third young girl to be violently taken in less than 3 months, each loss deepening the city's collective despair and amplifying the urgent need for answers. Her case, however, introduced a chilling new dimension to the unfolding horror, the unsettling phone calls. Brenda was the only known victim to have communicated with her family after her abduction, her desperate words echoing through the night, a horrifying glimpse into her ordeal. Yet, the very nature of those calls, the strange phrasing, the abrupt disconnections, and the heavy footsteps heard in the background, cast a long shadow of doubt. Was it truly Brenda speaking freely, her words her own, or was she merely a terrified mouthpiece, her voice a cruel instrument wielded by an unseen, malevolent presence, relaying a performance orchestrated by her captor? The unresolved question hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud obscuring the true horror of her final moments and leaving a trail of agonizing speculation for her grieving family and baffled authorities. The chilling possibility loomed large in the minds of the investigators: was Brenda truly speaking of her own accord, or was an unseen hand orchestrating her words, a menacing presence standing just out of sight, dictating her every terrifying utterance? Was she a terrified puppet, forced to perform a macabre script for a deranged captor, her fragile voice a tool in his twisted game? The police, grappling with the unprecedented nature of these communications, found themselves mired in a bewildering uncertainty, unable to fully comprehend the implications of the calls. Each potential scenario offered a new layer of horror. Yet, amidst the confusion and the agonizing questions, one terrifying truth began to crystallize with unnerving clarity: these abhorrent acts were not random, not isolated misfortunes. A sinister pattern was undeniably emerging, weaving a dark tapestry of abduction and murder across the city, and the chilling certainty settled upon them that this horrific saga was far from its conclusion. The community in Washington, D.C., already bruised and wary, was now teetering on a precipice of profound collective anxiety. By the time Brenda Crockett's small, meticulously arranged body was discovered, the city's veneer of normalcy had shattered, replaced by an almost palpable state of hypervigilance. The air itself seemed charged with apprehension, every shadow potentially concealing a threat, every stranger a possible harbinger of doom. 3 vibrant young black girls, children with their own dreams, their own laughter, their own unique futures, had been brutally snatched from their lives, each one subjected to the same horrifying fate, abduction, strangulation, and then the ultimate indignity of being discarded by the roadside like so much refuse. The stark similarities were too stark to be mere coincidence. The demographic of the victims, their tender ages, the chillingly consistent modus operandi of abduction and murder, and the callous manner of disposal along the very arteries that connected their neighborhoods. These congruencies screamed of a single, malevolent force at work, a predator systematically targeting the most vulnerable. Despite the glaring parallels and the rising tide of fear, a perplexing reluctance gripped the authorities. The police, perhaps wary of igniting widespread panic or unwilling to acknowledge such a monstrous threat within their jurisdiction, hesitated to publicly concede that a serial offender was terrorizing their city. Instead, they clung to explanations that strained credulity, initially dismissing the disappearances as isolated incidents or, even more cruelly, suggesting the girls were merely runaways. They might have envisioned the city as a grand chessboard, and this was an inconvenient, unforeseen anomaly they wished to sweep away. However, in the tightly knit neighborhoods where these girls had lived, where their laughter had once echoed and their faces were familiar, such facile explanations were met with fierce disbelief and indignation. These families, these communities, knew their daughters intimately. They were not flighty or rebellious, they were cherished, responsible children, and the notion that they would simply abandon their homes and loved ones was an insult to their memory and a cruel dismissal of their parents' grief. The chasm between official rhetoric and lived reality widened, fueling a simmering resentment and an unwavering conviction that a far greater, more terrifying truth lay beneath the surface. Even if, by some stretch of the imagination, these young girls had indeed decided to flee their homes, the grim reality of their discovery utterly defied the typical narrative of runaways. Runaways did not surface in such a horrifying manner, brutally strangled, callously discarded, stripped not only of their lives but of their very dignity, their bodies often showing signs of meticulous, disturbing arrangement. The stark contrast between the official narratives and the brutal facts was a searing indictment. Yet, in the face of such overwhelming evidence pointing to something far more sinister, the police offered little more than a frustrating silence punctuated by vague, uninformative statements. There were no detailed composite sketches of potential perpetrators, no named suspects, no actionable leads to grasp onto, just an escalating torrent of unanswered questions that tormented the grieving families and baffled the wider public. A deep-seated, righteous anger began to simmer within Washington, D.C.'s black community, quickly reaching a boiling point of frustration and despair. It was impossible to shake the pervasive and deeply painful conviction that these precious young lives were not being accorded the same urgency, the same relentless pursuit of justice, that would have been afforded to victims from more privileged demographics. This was the early 1970s, a tumultuous era already fraught with racial tension that crackled beneath the city's surface like an invisible current. The collective memory of systemic inequalities and injustices was fresh and raw. Now, with the horrifying reality of young black girls turning up dead, and the perceived indifference, or at least lack of transparent urgency, from the very authorities sworn to protect them, those long-simmering tensions threatened to explode into outright civil unrest. The air in the city felt thick, heavy with unspoken accusations and mounting fury. Feeling abandoned by official channels, the people in the community, driven by a primal need for protection and a profound sense of outrage, began to take matters into their own hands. They were forced to become their own guardians. Neighborhood watch groups materialized organically, their members, many of whom were parents themselves, patrolling the streets with flashlights and determined, weary faces, trying to reclaim a sense of security that had been so cruelly stolen. Parents, once content to let their children roam freely on sun-drenched afternoons, now gripped their hands tighter, meticulously escorting them to and from school, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. The vibrant sounds of children's laughter that once filled summer nights, the carefree shouts of kids playing tag or hide-and-seek, were abruptly silenced, replaced by the ominous quiet of homes with doors locked tight, windows carefully latched. A pervasive, suffocating fear, invisible yet palpable, had taken root, spreading through every household, every block, every schoolyard. Just when the city believed it had plumbed the depths of its collective dread, when it seemed things simply could not descend any further into the abyss of terror, another girl vanished, her disappearance echoing through the already frayed nerves of a city on the brink. The dreadful silence that followed her absence was far more terrifying than any scream. It was the first day of October in 1971, a Friday evening that, by all accounts, started with a deceptive veneer of ordinary peace in the quiet residential pockets of Northwest D.C. The air carried the crisp, early autumn chill, and the streetlights were just beginning to hum to life, casting long, golden shadows. 12-year-old Naomoshio Yates, a bright-eyed girl whose new 6th-grade textbooks from Kelly Miller Junior High still smelled faintly of fresh ink and paper, embarked on a routine errand. She left the familiar comfort of her home on Benning Road, her mother's simple list clutched in her hand, sugar, flour, and a pack of paper plates from the nearby Safeway. This was a well-worn path, a familiar journey she had undoubtedly made a dozen times before, her youthful footsteps echoing confidently along the cracked sidewalks. Yet, on this particular evening, a malevolent shadow descended, and she never returned home, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Around 7 o'clock that evening, several witnesses recalled seeing Naomoshio, affectionately known as Nino Mashia, entering the brightly lit supermarket, her small frame momentarily illuminated by the fluorescent glow within. One particular individual even reported the unsettling sight of her stepping into a distinctive blue Volkswagen, its curves hinting at a newer model, driven by an adult whose face remained a blur in the gathering dusk. After that brief, unsettling observation, the veil of silence descended. Nothing more. No further sightings, no phone calls, no familiar footsteps returning to her anxious home. The minutes stretched into hours, each passing moment amplifying the growing dread within her family. The autumn evening, initially so serene, now felt charged with an unbearable tension. Then, just 3 hours later, as the city lights twinkled in the distance, a solitary hitchhiker, a weary figure journeying along the dark expanse of Pennsylvania Avenue, made a ghastly discovery. His eyes, accustomed to scanning the roadside for approaching headlights, caught an anomalous shape in the dew-laden grass, precisely where the district line blurred into rural Maryland. There, tragically illuminated by his car's approaching beams, lay Nino Mashia's body, her youthful life extinguished with brutal finality. She, too, had been strangled, her small form a heartbreaking testament to the escalating terror gripping the city. Disturbingly, her clothes remained intact, much like Brenda's, suggesting the same unsettling precision from her killer. However, in a grim echo of the previous victims, her shoes were conspicuously missing, leaving her bare feet to the cold, damp earth. Furthermore, as investigators meticulously processed the scene under the harsh glare of floodlights, they made a crucial observation: tiny, vivid green fibers clung stubbornly to her clothing, a silent, yet potentially powerful, clue woven into the fabric of this escalating horror, a thread that might, just might, lead them to the elusive freeway phantom. The discovery only deepened the fear, signaling that the monster had struck again, his reach extending further into the unsuspecting community. These fibers, microscopic yet immensely significant, were meticulously analyzed and quickly determined not to be native to Naomoshio's home. Instead, their composition strongly suggested they originated from an artificial source, most likely a rug or carpet, hinting at a hidden location, a terrifying interlude where she had been held captive before her body was callously deposited along the roadside. The sheer force of the strangulation was horrifyingly evident. It had been so violent, so merciless, that it had ruptured her esophagus, a grim testament to the perpetrator's immense rage, his chilling need for absolute control, and his utter brutality. Despite this barbarity, her body was found fully clothed, maintaining the disturbing pattern of meticulous arrangement, though she had been left exposed to the elements, her small form lying vulnerable in the damp, cold grass, a silent victim to both human cruelty and nature's indifference. Naomoshio's death marked a chilling and undeniable escalation in the escalating reign of terror. She was the fourth young girl to be violently taken in a mere 6 months, each loss a fresh wound in the community's psyche. Her body's discovery within hours of her disappearance suggested an alarming efficiency and proximity of the killer. And yet, even with such a rapid and horrifying progression, the police continued to struggle, seemingly unable or unwilling to coherently connect the increasingly obvious threads of these cases. Despite the undeniable, recurring patterns, the age of the victims, their shared race, the method of abduction, the manner of death by strangulation, the unique characteristics of the dumping sites, and now the eerie detail of missing shoes and meticulous body placement, authorities continued to inexplicably treat each murder as a separate, isolated incident. The lack of a cohesive, unified investigation was a profound source of anguish and frustration for the beleaguered communities. Consequently, no arrests were made, no suspects named, and no relief offered to the burgeoning terror. For the families residing in both Washington, D.C. and the sprawling Prince George's County, every new, devastating loss made the very air feel heavier, thicker with an almost suffocating dread. The vibrant sounds of everyday life began to recede, replaced by a constant hum of anxiety. Fear was no longer a distant rumor, a whispered cautionary tale. It had materialized, taking tangible form, lurking in the deep, unyielding shadows of residential corners and along the desolate stretches of dark road that bordered the freeways, those arteries of connection now turned into pathways of terror. The unseen predator was everywhere and nowhere, a phantom menace. No one in the beleaguered cities knew who the killer was, his identity shrouded in a terrifying anonymity, but one thing was becoming agonizingly clear: his spree of unspeakable violence was far from over. And the next victim could be anyone's child, transforming every ordinary outing into a potential last goodbye. The year 1971 marked the ominous beginning of a profoundly dark chapter for the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., a period shrouded in an escalating reign of terror that would etch itself into the city's collective memory for decades to come. A horrifying pattern began to emerge: young black girls, brimming with youthful promise and innocent vitality, were inexplicably vanishing from their familiar neighborhoods. Their disappearances were not fleeting, but final, as their small, lifeless bodies would later be discovered, typically days after their abduction, brutally murdered and then callously discarded along the impersonal stretches of highways and major roadways that crisscrossed the metropolitan area. This was not merely a series of crimes, it was the genesis of a nightmare that would cast a long, chilling shadow over the city for years, leaving behind a devastating legacy of unresolved grief, profound trauma, and an aching void of unanswered questions for countless families. By the time the body of 12-year-old Nina Mashia Yates was tragically discovered, brutally strangled and left by the roadside, the community had already been profoundly shaken to its core by a succession of these horrifying murders. The initial shock had morphed into a pervasive fear, a deep-seated apprehension that clung to every street corner and whispered through every neighborhood. Her death, however, acted as a grim turning point. As the fourth young black girl to be killed in just over 5 agonizing months, it became utterly impossible, even for the most reluctant observers, to continue viewing these cases as isolated, unrelated tragedies or unfortunate coincidences. The sheer weight of the mounting evidence and the horrifying echoes between each victim now demanded a more terrifying conclusion. The similarities between these cases were no longer merely striking, they were impossible to ignore, screaming of a single, malevolent hand at work. Each of the innocent victims had vanished under chillingly similar circumstances, engaged in the most routine, mundane activities of daily life. These were typically short, seemingly innocuous trips, a quick errand to the store, a walk to a friend's house, a journey that should have been entirely safe, a brief interlude from the watchful eyes of their families. All of the girls shared a demographic: they were all young black girls, each with her own burgeoning personality, residing within the same general area of the city and its immediate environs. The geographical nexus of the killer's cruel acts further cemented the chilling pattern. Their bodies were consistently discovered, callously dumped, either within or perilously close to the border of Prince George's County, Maryland, a strategic choice that allowed the killer to exploit jurisdictional boundaries and create confusion. And in every single, heartbreaking instance, the method of death was the same: each girl had been brutally strangled, their lives snuffed out by a horrifyingly consistent hand. The precision of the method, the consistency of the victim profile, and the haunting familiarity of the dumping locations combined to paint an indelible, terrifying portrait of an active, escalating serial predator, whose next move remained shrouded in a chilling uncertainty, leaving the city in a perpetual state of dread. In a truly unsettling number of these tragic cases, a peculiar and seemingly insignificant detail emerged. The girls' shoes were consistently missing from the scenes of their discovery. At first, this might have been dismissed as a random occurrence, a meaningless anomaly in the chaos of a murder. However, by the chilling autumn of 1971, this specific absence had morphed into a disturbing, almost macabre signature of the killer, an unnerving calling card left in the wake of his horrific acts. It hinted at a ritualistic element, a twisted personal touch that only amplified the terror. Still, despite this increasingly clear and horrifying pattern, a disconcerting hesitancy persisted within law enforcement agencies. There was a notable reluctance to publicly acknowledge or formally link these heinous murders. At this crucial juncture, the Washington, D.C. Police Department and the Prince George's County Police Force, though both engaged in active investigations, were largely operating in parallel. Their efforts, unfortunately, were not always collaborative or seamlessly integrated. Critical information, vital clues, and developing insights did not flow freely or efficiently between the two jurisdictions, creating dangerous gaps in understanding and hindering a comprehensive response. Moreover, the victims, predominantly young black girls, unfortunately hailed from a demographic segment of society that was all too often marginalized, overlooked, and underserved by both mainstream media and the authoritative structures of the time. This unfortunate reality contributed to a tragic lack of real urgency to publicly sound the alarm, to galvanize a citywide effort, or to prioritize these cases with the intensity they so desperately warranted. However, if official channels were slow to react, the community itself was acutely aware. The whispers had already begun, spreading like wildfire through barbershops, church pews, and neighborhood stoops, hushed, terrified murmurs about a shadowy predator lurking along the highways, turning everyday routes into pathways of dread. A profound, almost primal shift in behavior began to manifest. Parents, gripped by an agonizing fear, ceased allowing their daughters to walk anywhere unaccompanied, their protective instincts overriding any previous sense of security. Teenagers, once carefree and bold, now moved in tight-knit, vigilant groups, their eyes darting nervously, glancing over their shoulders, even when the sun was high in the sky. The very fabric of community life was subtly, then undeniably, altered. The jovial spontaneity of children at play, the casual strolls of neighbors, all vanished, replaced by a pervasive wariness. People were deeply, profoundly afraid, and given the escalating body count and the chilling signatures of an unapprehended monster, they had every justifiable reason to be. The phantom was not just a rumor, he was a horrifying reality, silently stalking their streets. Eventually, the insistent, grim reality of the escalating death toll could no longer be ignored by the broader media. Newspapers, initially hesitant, began to cautiously pick up the story, their headlines hinting at the horrifying, undeniable possibility of a serial killer preying on the city's most vulnerable. Journalists, grappling with how to categorize such elusive and brutal evil, soon coined a chilling, almost spectral phrase to describe the mysterious figure behind the murders, the freeway phantom. This moniker, whispered with a mixture of fear and awe, painted a vivid, terrifying image of a predator who haunted the city's thoroughfares, a ghost-like entity leaving only sorrow in his wake. And while official channels still adamantly refrained from uttering those terrifying words aloud, a horrifying truth was undeniably settling, heavy and cold, into the hearts of the families across Washington, D.C. Someone, an unseen monster, was deliberately hunting these young black girls. And with each passing day, it became sickeningly clear that his reign of terror was far from finished. As the community struggled desperately to come to terms with the unfolding nightmare, the insidious tendrils of fear, which had once merely whispered through the close-knit neighborhoods, now erupted into a full-throated, deafening panic. The collective anxiety was almost suffocating, an oppressive blanket settling over the city. While the term serial killer remained officially unpronounced by law enforcement, everyone in the affected areas knew its grim reality. The unspoken word hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the unseen menace. And as the city grappled with this profound psychological trauma, striving to maintain a semblance of normalcy amidst the escalating terror, the horror only deepened its insidious grip. On the 15th day of November, 1971, a date now etched into the city's dark history, 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodward began her journey home. The night air was cool, perhaps carrying the scent of damp leaves, as she left her night class at Cardo High School. Brenda was not just another student, she was a beacon of determination, a young woman driven by an unyielding focus and an admirable ambition to meticulously carve out a better future for herself, far removed from the limitations that might have otherwise defined her path. Her dreams, vibrant and palpable, shimmered in the urban glow, moments before the darkness of the freeway phantom would once again extend its cruel, unyielding grasp. Her story, poised on the precipice of tragedy, was about to become another agonizing chapter in the city's unfolding nightmare, a chilling continuation of the phantom's deadly work. Brenda, acutely aware of the competitive job market and fiercely independent, had diligently embarked on evening typing and office skills courses. The methodical click-clack of the typewriters in her classroom represented not just a skill, but a tangible pathway to improving her job prospects and securing a brighter, more stable future. That particular evening, after a session of dedicated study, she had enjoyed a convivial dinner with a classmate at Ben's Chili Bowl, a venerable DC landmark whose vibrant, bustling interior, filled with the aroma of chili half-smokes and the cheerful din of conversation, offered a momentary respite from the world outside. The red vinyl booths, the checkered floor, the clatter of plates, all provided a comforting backdrop to her ambitious plans. Typically, her classmate would have offered her a ride home, a familiar routine. But on this night, fate intervened with a cruel twist. His car was regrettably in the shop for repairs. Consequently, they shared a bus ride for a portion of their journey home, the familiar rumble and sway of the public transport offering a temporary sense of security. When their paths diverged, Brenda, with a confident wave and a cheerful goodbye, disembarked at the transfer point, her destination the next bus, which she intended to board alone. The city lights twinkled around her, oblivious to the insidious darkness that now awaited. That brief, seemingly innocuous moment, as she stepped away from her friend and into the night, marked the last time anyone would ever see Brenda Denise Woodward alive, her vibrant dreams tragically suspended in time. In the desolate, early morning hours of November 16, just a handful of hours after Brenda had parted ways with her classmate, a Chevrolet police officer was conducting a routine patrol. His cruiser glided along the quiet roads near Prince George's County Hospital, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Suddenly, a flicker of something out of place, a chilling anomaly on the side of the road, snagged his practiced eye. Near the entrance ramp to Route 202, a lesser-used connector just off the bustling Baltimore-Washington Parkway, lay the body of Brenda Woodward. Her life, so full of promise, had been brutally extinguished. She, too, had been strangled, mirroring the horrific fate of the girls before her. Yet, this time, a palpable difference permeated the scene, an unsettling intensity that spoke of something deeper, something angrier and more ferocious in the killer's final act. The silence of the roadside was thick with a new kind of violence, an almost audible rage that hinted at an escalating brutality, a terrifying evolution in the monster's methodology. The discovery was a chilling new chapter in the Freeway Phantom saga, confirming that the predator's malice was growing, his thirst for control insatiable. Brenda's body bore the horrific marks of a desperate struggle. She had been stabbed 6 times, each wound a testament to the ferocity of the attack. Her hands and arms, starkly visible against the pallor of her skin, were marred with defensive wounds, cuts, bruises, and scrapes, undeniable evidence that she had fought back with every ounce of her strength, her very will to live. Her blood, dark and stark, stained her clothes, a grim tapestry illustrating her final, defiant act of resistance against her attacker. The brutality of this particular murder was undeniable, the violence raw and visceral, painting a stark picture of overwhelming rage and unbridled savagery that transcended the cold calculation seen in earlier cases. And then, something even more chilling and utterly malevolent emerged from the details of the scene. Her body had been left with a deliberate, calculated cruelty, near a bus stop, a place of everyday transit, the very spot her mother frequented almost every single day. It was there, amidst the flashing blue and red lights that cut through the pre-dawn gloom, drawing nearer to the ominous police tape, that Brenda's mother, her heart already heavy with a mother's premonition, learned the unspeakable fate that had befallen her daughter. The revelation, delivered at a site so mundane yet now irrevocably stained with horror, was a profound and unbearable blow. This was no longer merely a pattern of crimes, it had escalated into a full-blown, living nightmare, an active campaign of terror. And whoever this monstrous individual was, they were undeniably growing bolder, their calculated cruelty evolving into an almost theatrical display of power and contempt. But it wasn't solely the escalating brutality of Brenda's murder that left even the most seasoned investigators profoundly shaken and disturbed. It was what they discovered, meticulously tucked inside the pocket of her coat, that truly sent a shiver down their spines. Folded neatly, almost ceremoniously, was a note. The words scrawled upon that piece of paper, a direct communication from the killer, were chilling beyond measure, reaching into the very core of their hardened sensibilities. The quote read, with an unnerving mixture of arrogance and cold-blooded confession, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can." It was signed, with a flourish of twisted self-importance, the Freeway Phantom. The note was not just a confession, it was a taunt, a challenge thrown directly at law enforcement, a chilling promise of further violence, and an unnerving insight into the mind of a predator who reveled in his own depravity. The Phantom had finally spoken, and his words promised only more darkness to come, solidifying his terrifying presence in the city's terrified imagination. This chilling note marked the very first instance where the killer brazenly bestowed upon himself the moniker Freeway Phantom. It was an act of profound arrogance, as if the unfolding horror was merely some perverse game, a twisted theatrical performance where these innocent girls, these precious children, were utterly disposable pawns in his malevolent design. He was not just committing unspeakable acts, he was daring the entire apparatus of law enforcement to intervene, to stop him if they possibly could, relishing in their perceived impotence. The note unequivocally confirmed what a terror-stricken community had already suspected in their deepest fears. The same insidious individual was indeed responsible for the escalating string of murders that had cast a suffocating pall over Washington, D.C. for months. Now, with this direct communication, he wasn't just lurking in the shadows, he was openly challenging law enforcement, taunting them with an unnerving confidence that he would evade capture, reveling in his perceived untouchability. However, beyond the audacity of the message itself, what truly stood out to investigators and shocked the public was the peculiar, almost clinical language used within the note. It was formal, meticulously rehearsed, and chillingly devoid of emotion. Phrases like "tantamount to my insensitivity" spoke volumes. This was not the raw, impulsive language of a man consumed by uncontrolled rage or operating on a whim. This was the calculated prose of an individual who was meticulously planning his every move, someone obsessed with exercising absolute control over his victims, the crime scenes, and even the narrative surrounding his actions. He was a predator who not only wanted to kill but also yearned to be recognized, to be known for his depravity, even as he cloaked his identity in shadow. And yet, even with this unprecedented, direct communication from the killer, even with the stark escalation in violence, marked by the brutal stabbings and the public taunt, the police remained frustratingly without any substantial leads. There was no clear suspect, no detailed description, no concrete piece of information that could genuinely break the case open and put an end to the ever-growing list of victims. The city, already reeling, was left exposed and vulnerable. The grim reality was that the Freeway Phantom was still out there, unhindered, a ghost in the urban landscape. And before the calendar year of 1971 drew to its cold, inevitable close, this tragic list of young lives stolen would, with horrifying certainty, expand once again, plunging the beleaguered community into an even deeper abyss of despair and fear. The Phantom's chilling promise was being fulfilled. Following the brutal murder of Brenda Woodward, the fifth known victim to fall prey to the unseen predator, any lingering doubt, both within the deeply affected community and among the increasingly beleaguered ranks of investigators, was unequivocally shattered. It was now horrifyingly clear, these were not disparate, isolated crimes, a singular, malevolent force was actively hunting young black girls in Washington, D.C. The city, once vibrant and bustling, was now gripped by a pervasive terror, its streets shadowed by an invisible menace. And now, the elusive killer had a name, a chilling moniker that would forever be etched into the city's history, the Freeway Phantom. The formal, taunting note, found clutched in Brenda's coat pocket, served as undeniable, horrifying evidence, solidifying the pattern and the killer's audacious challenge. With the note now officially in evidence, a tangible piece of the killer's mind, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, officially interceded, bringing its formidable resources and expertise to bear on the burgeoning crisis. The federal agency began working in concert with the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department and the Prince George's County authorities, hoping that a unified approach might finally break the case. A specialized task force, composed of seasoned detectives and forensic experts, was promptly assembled in a nondescript office, its walls soon plastered with maps, timelines, and the haunting photographs of the victims. While law enforcement had harbored suspicions of a link between the victims for some time, this direct communication from the killer irrevocably confirmed their darkest fears. In a rare and significant public acknowledgement, authorities finally conceded, for the very first time, that the cases were indeed likely connected, a unified statement that, while late, brought a glimmer of official validation to the terror felt by the community. Despite this much-needed surge in manpower and resources, the combined investigation remained frustratingly devoid of concrete, actionable clues. The phantom seemed to vanish as swiftly as he appeared, leaving behind only grief and confounding mysteries. Detectives meticulously re-interviewed every known witness, scrutinizing their statements for any overlooked detail, any fleeting observation that might have been dismissed. They painstakingly reviewed the known routes taken by each girl, walking in their last known footsteps, searching for a missed anomaly, a stray piece of evidence. Friends and classmates were questioned exhaustively, their memories probed for any snippet of conversation, any unusual encounter that might offer a lead. Every minute detail of each girl's final known movements, from the moment they left home to their tragic disappearance, was painstakingly combed through, analyzed, and cross-referenced. The task force pored over forensic reports, the faint green fibers found on Neomoshio Yates's clothing, the meticulous arrangement of Brenda Crockett's body, searching for any anomaly, any thread that might unravel the killer's identity. Yet, the freeway phantom remained a ghost, his true face hidden, his next move a terrifying uncertainty that held the entire metropolitan area in its suffocating grip, leaving the city on the edge of its collective breath, wondering when, and where, he would strike again. In the nascent days of the early 1970s, the arsenal of surveillance techniques available to law enforcement was considerably primitive compared to modern standards. Closed-circuit television was a rarity, digital tracking non-existent, and comprehensive street-level monitoring a logistical impossibility. Furthermore, forensic technology, the very bedrock of modern criminal investigations, was decades behind the sophisticated capabilities we take for granted today. Without the crucial breakthroughs of fingerprint automation, the revolutionary power of DNA analysis, or the fortunate presence of credible eyewitnesses, the entire case remained frustratingly stagnant, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Tips, often born of frantic fear or misdirected speculation, flooded in, yet each one ultimately led nowhere, dissolving into dead ends and false hopes. The city, repeatedly battered by these horrific acts, was left in a recurring cycle of profound mourning and desperate uncertainty, while the elusive killer, a specter of malice, simply melted back into the shadows, his presence a chilling memory. The police, despite their combined efforts, found themselves perpetually chasing a ghost, a phantom who had now struck 5 times with devastating precision, each time managing to vanish into thin air before anyone could catch a fleeting glimpse of his true identity. He was a master of evasion, his anonymity a powerful weapon. However, following the brutal murder of Brenda Woodward and the audacious taunt of the note, the so-called freeway phantom inexplicably vanished. For nearly an entire year, an unsettling silence descended upon the metropolitan area. There were no new victims, no more cryptic notes to terrorize the public, no discernible sign of the predator who had held Washington, D.C. in a suffocating grip of fear. This uncharacteristic lull, this prolonged break in the horrifying pattern, brought a brief, uneasy sense of tentative release to the traumatized community, a fragile hope that the nightmare might finally be over. But the seasoned investigators, their minds accustomed to the dark complexities of human evil, knew better. This lull did not feel like an end, it felt like a deliberate pause, a strategic retreat, like a predator patiently lying in wait, biding his time before striking again with renewed ferocity. The air itself seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, a collective holding of breath. Yet, beneath the surface, behind the scenes of public calm, the investigation had begun to falter, its momentum dissipating in the absence of fresh leads. The initial surge of energy from the task force slowly waned, the vast amounts of information yielding frustratingly little, leaving the case perilously close to becoming cold, its files gathering dust in the growing silence. The Phantom's quiet retreat had effectively stalled the very pursuit intended to stop him, leaving an eerie sense of foreboding that the peace was merely temporary, a prelude to further, unimaginable horrors. The initial surge of momentum that had so desperately galvanized the investigation following Brenda Woodward's murder, an energy born of desperation and the killer's audacious note, slowly began to dissipate. Like a fading ember, the intense focus that had briefly illuminated the case grew dim. Media interest, ever fickle, waned as other headlines jostled for attention, and the steady stream of potential tips, once a deluge, dwindled to an infrequent trickle, leaving investigators with fewer and fewer threads to pull. To compound the growing challenges, the specialized FBI agents, whose expertise and resources were crucial to the task force, were abruptly redirected. Their formidable talents were urgently redeployed to assist with a burgeoning political scandal, a seismic event that was just beginning to rumble through the nation's capital and would soon engulf the entire country, Watergate. Suddenly, the national spotlight had drastically shifted, and with it, the critical investigative resources. The Freeway Phantom case, once a harrowing priority, found itself relegated to a secondary concern, its urgent pursuit overshadowed by the unfolding political drama. Yet, for the grieving families of the 5 missing girls, this shift in focus brought no solace, no answers, only a renewed sense of abandonment. 5 precious young lives had been brutally extinguished, and their elusive killer remained terrifyingly free, haunting the fringes of their despair. For many agonizing months, it seemed as if the case had simply withered and died, settling into the chilling silence of a cold file, a tragic injustice destined for the dusty archives of forgotten crimes. But then, with a terrifying suddenness in September of 1972, the fragile peace was shattered. The year-long silence, a thin veil over the city's unhealed wounds, was brutally ripped away. The Freeway Phantom had returned, his reappearance a stark reminder that the lull was merely a strategic pause, a period of ominous inactivity before another devastating strike. His chosen victim this time was Diane Denise Williams, a vibrant and ambitious 17-year-old senior at Ballou High School. Diane was renowned amongst her peers for her absolutely flawless sense of style, her innate ability to carry herself with an effortless grace and an unmistakable aura of confidence. These intrinsic traits, far more than mere superficialities, were the very fuel for her burgeoning dreams of becoming a professional model, a future she envisioned with vivid clarity. Her life, brimming with aspiration and youthful elegance, was about to be tragically snuffed out, another innocent soul caught in the Phantom's widening web of terror, pulling the city back into the heart of its deepest nightmare. Throughout the sun-drenched summer of 1972, a period that now seemed tinged with a cruel irony, Diane had devoted much of her cherished free time to her boyfriend, their days filled with the ephemeral joys of young love. Then, on the evening of September 5, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, she meticulously prepared dinner for her family, a familiar act of domesticity that anchored her busy life. After the meal, she departed, heading out to meet her boyfriend, a routine she had established and which had become an ordinary, comforting rhythm in her week. The young couple spent a few hours together, perhaps sharing laughter and dreams, their conversation punctuated by the usual teenage concerns. As the evening drew to a close, and it was time for their customary parting, her boyfriend, with a tender gesture, walked her to a nearby bus stop situated along Martin Luther King Avenue. This particular street, though familiar in its urban landscape, carried a chilling, almost spectral history. An unspoken dread clung to its name, for just over a year prior, 2 other young girls, Carol Spinks and Darlenia Johnson, had vanished without a trace from that very same stretch of road, their disappearances now woven into the fabric of the community's escalating fear. After a final, lingering goodbye kiss, Diane confidently boarded a city bus, its destination her home in the Halley Terrace neighborhood. She expected the usual journey, the familiar sights and sounds of the city passing by her window. But on this night, her usual route became a path to an unknown horror. She never made it home. The subsequent morning, September 6, under the weak light of the nascent day, a weary truck driver, navigating the vast expanse of Interstate 295, pulled his colossal rig over to the shoulder. Just south of the bustling D.C.-Maryland border, his eyes, scanning the roadside in the dim light, caught an anomalous shape, a grim interruption in the mundane landscape. What he spotted, lying tragically off the side of the road, would not only confirm the freeway phantom's terrifying return but also plunge the city back into its darkest nightmare, reigniting the fear with a renewed, devastating intensity. When the first police cruiser screamed onto the scene, their flashing lights piercing the morning gloom, they discovered Diane's body discarded, with a chilling proximity, less than 2 miles from the very home she had hoped to reach. Her young life, brimming with aspirations of a modeling career, had been violently extinguished. She was still dressed in the same stylish outfit she had worn the night before, a poignant testament to her last conscious moments. Her shoes, following the killer's macabre signature, had been removed. However, rather than being completely absent from the scene, they had been placed neatly alongside her body, almost as if arranged for a somber display. This meticulous placement, devoid of the usual disarray of a violent struggle, amplified the unsettling atmosphere. But it was another small detail, one that seemed almost trivial at first glance, that truly left the hardened detectives profoundly unsettled, sending a shiver down their spines. Scrawled in large, bold, unmistakable letters across the sole of one of her shoes was her name, Diane. This personal inscription, a chilling act of communication, transcended mere identification. It was a brazen, defiant taunt from the killer, a direct message embedded within his signature act. Like the other innocent victims, Diane had been brutally strangled, her final breath stolen by the unseen predator. Following the murder of Diane Williams, the 6th victim in this terrifying saga, authorities, now undeniably confronted with the full, devastating scope of the ongoing terror, once again intensified their efforts, pouring renewed resources into catching the individual responsible for the relentless series of killings that had left the entire community gripped by fear and submerged in profound grief. The Metropolitan Police Department, desperate for a breakthrough, established a dedicated tip line, its phone ringing off the hook, a beacon of hope for information that could finally break the agonizing stalemate. Calls did indeed flood in, a torrent of frantic, hopeful, and often desperate voices, but none of them, tragically, led to any viable suspects or concrete leads. Realizing the immense gravity of the situation, the unprecedented nature of the crimes, and the pervasive fear gripping the city, law enforcement finally formalized their approach, creating a truly dedicated, multi-agency task force. This official consolidation of efforts was a belated but crucial step, a desperate attempt to pool resources, streamline communication, and apply every available tool to unmask the freeway phantom before he could claim yet another innocent life, transforming the lives of countless families into a living, unending nightmare. The city held its breath, hoping this unified force could finally bring an end to the terror, but the phantom remained elusive, his next move a terrifying mystery. On paper, the newly established task force presented an impressive, seemingly unified front, a beacon of hope against the escalating terror. Its formalized structure and multi-agency representation gave the impression of a powerful, coordinated effort poised to finally apprehend the elusive killer. However, behind the polished facade and official declarations, a labyrinth of serious, systemic issues was already beginning to insidiously hinder the investigation, slowly strangling its momentum. One major, debilitating problem lay within the Metropolitan Police Department's antiquated policy on record-keeping. At that crucial time, individual detectives maintained an almost proprietary control over their case files, treating them more like personal portfolios than shared, institutional resources. This meant there was a profound absence of any centralized database, no coordinated tracking system, and certainly no easily accessible, comprehensive overview of the freeway phantom case. The implications were devastating, as investigators inevitably transferred to different units, retired from service, or, even more critically, left the force entirely. Vital records often vanished with them, or were left incomplete, fragmented, and unintelligible to those who came after. Over time, many original documents directly tied to the intricate Freeway Phantom case, witness statements, forensic reports, timelines, and suspect profiles either disappeared entirely into the bureaucratic ether or became so fragmented and disorganized that their utility was severely compromised. These profound gaps in documentation catastrophically complicated the ongoing investigation, especially as more personnel were brought onto the case, finding themselves working with severely limited access to its full and evolving history. It was like trying to navigate a dense fog with a torn, incomplete map. But despite these crippling logistical impediments and the gnawing frustration, the dedicated detectives, driven by a tireless commitment to justice and haunted by the faces of the young victims, continued their relentless pursuit of leads. They tirelessly sifted through the available fragments, clung to every whisper of a clue, and followed every potential thread, no matter how tenuous. Their determination was a testament to their resolve, even as the system around them seemed to conspire against their efforts. In the year 1974, a particularly intriguing avenue of inquiry emerged when two former D.C. residents, their memories perhaps stirred by the enduring mystery, came forward with information that seemed to offer a glimmer of hope, potentially casting new light on the dark corners of the Freeway Phantom's chilling activities. This sudden, unexpected development, though years after the initial wave of murders, promised to re-inject a much-needed spark into the flagging investigation, hinting that perhaps, just perhaps, the ghost could finally be caught. In the year 1974, a significant development, albeit a misleading one for the Freeway Phantom case, emerged when two former D.C. police officers, Edward Selman and Tommy Simmons, were apprehended. They were subsequently convicted for the brutal murder of 14-year-old Angela Denise Barnes. Her tragic death had sent another wave of unease through the community, with initial speculation that it might be linked to the terrifying spree of the Freeway Phantom. However, after thorough investigation and careful analysis of the evidence, Angela Barnes's death was definitively ruled unrelated to the established patterns of the Freeway Phantom murders. Consequently, both Selman and Simmons were officially cleared of any connection to that broader, unsolved case, their convictions remaining solely for Barnes's murder. The Phantom remained at large, his identity still shrouded in mystery. Then, 3 years later, in 1977, a deeply disturbing figure named Robert Elwood Oskins unexpectedly captured the intense attention of investigators. Oskins had recently committed a heinous act, abducting and brutally raping a 24-year-old woman, a crime that immediately flagged him as a dangerous individual. During the course of his subsequent questioning, detectives unearthed the chilling details of his profoundly violent past, a history far more disturbing than they initially suspected. Decades earlier, when Oskins was a mere 19 years old, his proclivity for violence had already manifested in horrific ways. He had deliberately poisoned several women working in a D.C. brothel, one of whom tragically succumbed to the toxic assault. Adding to this catalogue of depravity, he had also stabbed another woman to death just days after the poisoning incident, demonstrating a terrifying pattern of escalating violence. At the time of those earlier crimes, Oskins was ultimately declared criminally insane by the courts and committed to a secure psychiatric hospital, a place intended to contain his dangerous impulses and provide treatment. However, even within the supposed confines of institutionalization, Oskins's inherent violence continued to surface with alarming frequency and intensity. Records indicated instances where he had demonstrated extreme aggression, once famously breaking free from his physical restraints and launching a vicious attack on multiple female staff members, illustrating an unyielding, deeply rooted hostility towards women. This extensive history of uncontained rage, particularly directed at women, immediately positioned Robert Elwood Oskins as a person of intense interest for the ongoing, desperate search for the Freeway Phantom, casting a dark new shadow of possibility over the long-dormant investigation, finally offering a tangible lead after years of chasing a ghost. Despite his documented history of extreme violence, Robert Elwood Oskins was, inexplicably, later released from institutional care, a decision that would prove to be tragically short-sighted. His violent behavior, far from abating, continued its horrific trajectory. In the 1950s, he committed another heinous act, strangling yet another woman. He was subsequently convicted of this murder, a legal triumph that should have ensured his permanent removal from society. However, in a bewildering twist of judicial fate, that conviction was inexplicably overturned, allowing him to walk free, a dangerous predator unleashed back onto the streets long before his 1977 arrest for abduction and rape. His deeply disturbing history, marked by a pattern of escalating violence and a profound, pathological hatred of women, made him an immediate and compelling person of interest. Investigators, after years of chasing shadows, saw him as a remarkably strong suspect in the perplexing Freeway Phantom case. In 1978, armed with a renewed sense of urgency and a glimmer of hope, police successfully obtained a warrant to meticulously search Oskins's home, desperately hoping to uncover any tangible link, any shred of evidence connecting him to the brutal Freeway Phantom murders. The search, however, yielded disappointingly little in terms of physical evidence directly tying him to the specific crimes. The initial excitement began to wane, threatening to dissolve into yet another dead end. Yet, amidst the otherwise unremarkable findings, one small, yet incredibly striking detail caught the detective's seasoned eyes, sending a collective shiver through the investigative team. Within his personal legal documents, meticulously arranged amongst other papers, they discovered the precise, uncommon word tantamount. This was not just any word, it was the identical, distinctive term used in the chilling note that had been left inside Brenda Woodward's pocket, a direct communication from the self-proclaimed Freeway Phantom. Tantamount was far from a common word in everyday vernacular, especially in such a context. Adding to the intrigue, Oskins's former co-workers, when questioned, confirmed that he used the word regularly, almost as a verbal tic, a distinctive part of his personal lexicon. This linguistic connection, a subtle yet powerful echo between the killer's taunt and Oskins's known speech patterns, was profoundly compelling. Still, beyond this intriguing verbal link, frustratingly, there remained no other hard, incontrovertible evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness testimony, no physical objects, that could definitively tie him to the string of murders. The case, once again, teetered on the precipice of an almost breakthrough, leaving investigators with a tantalizing suspect but no smoking gun, and the family still desperate for the definitive closure they so desperately craved. The Phantom's shadow, though seemingly narrowed, still stubbornly clung to its anonymity, hinting at deeper, unresolved mysteries. Even after a meticulous, thorough search of Robert Elwood Oskins's home and property, a process that left every crevice and corner scrutinized, the police ultimately walked away empty-handed, their initial excitement fading into renewed disappointment. The tantalizing linguistic link, while intriguing, remained frustratingly insufficient to build a solid case. Concurrently, with the investigation still stalled, detectives were also aggressively pursuing another significant lead, one that centered on a particularly violent and notorious criminal organization known as the Green Vega Rapists. This gang had terrorized the D.C. metropolitan area with a horrifying string of brutal abductions and rapes, their modus operandi a chilling echo of some of the Phantom's tactics. During intensive interviews with incarcerated former members of this gang, a surprising breakthrough occurred. One inmate, perhaps seeking leniency or driven by a hidden motive, offered to provide critical information regarding another gang member's possible involvement in the Freeway Phantom murders. His cooperation, however, came with a non-negotiable condition: his identity had to be meticulously protected, ensuring his safety from potential retaliation within the dangerous criminal underworld. The information he provided was astonishingly precise, including the exact date and location of one of the Freeway Phantom murders, as well as specific, intimate details surrounding the crime that had never, under any circumstances, been made public. Investigators, hardened veterans of countless brutal cases, were left genuinely stunned by the accuracy and specificity of the inmate's account. However, when they proceeded to question the gang member who had been so pointedly implicated, the man vehemently denied any involvement in the murders. Furthermore, his alibi, when meticulously cross-referenced and investigated, surprisingly checked out, seemingly exonerating him from direct culpability. Yet, the initial information provided by the inmate was simply too accurate, too detailed, to be summarily dismissed as mere fabrication or conjecture. It suggested an intimate knowledge of the crimes that could only come from direct involvement or close proximity. But just as this tantalizing thread seemed poised to unravel the mystery, just as momentum and hope began to build within the task force, the relentless machinations of politics brutally intervened, once again disrupting the fragile pursuit of justice and pushing the Freeway Phantom case back into the shadows, a recurring pattern of promising leads turning cold due to external forces. The shadow of the Phantom lengthened once more, a chilling testament to the systemic challenges plaguing the investigation. A local politician, his eyes fixated on the upcoming election season and his own career trajectory, callously disregarded the delicate trust built by investigators. In a brazen attempt to grab sensational headlines and burnish his public image, he publicly announced that a significant breakthrough in the Freeway Phantom case had originated from an inmate within the formidable walls of Lorton Prison. This reckless and unethical breach of confidentiality was catastrophic, instantly obliterating any fragile hope of continued cooperation from the informant. The inmate, whose courageous gamble on anonymity had offered such a tantalizing glimpse into the killer's world, immediately shut down, his fear now outweighing any desire for disclosure. He staunchly refused to speak further, retracting every single detail he had previously shared with investigators, his silence now as impenetrable as the prison walls that surrounded him. And just like that, with a single, self-serving political act, the most promising lead in years, a beacon of hope for justice, dissolved into nothingness, leaving the task force back at square one, their collective frustration a bitter, tangible presence. Despite the massive, multi-agency task force that had been painstakingly assembled, and the tantalizing handful of promising leads that had briefly flickered with potential, the Freeway Phantom case, once again, gradually began to lose its vital momentum. Like a complex machine deprived of fuel, its gears slowly ground to a halt. The fervent media attention that had once relentlessly spotlighted the string of horrific murders, plastering the victims' faces across newspaper pages and leading nightly news segments, slowly faded into the background as weeks turned into months, and months into years, without any tangible resolution. The initial surge of community outrage, fierce and incandescent, slowly gave way to a weary, heavy resignation, a quiet acceptance of the terrifying reality that justice might never be served. The names of the innocent girls, once whispered with grief and a desperate plea for remembrance, began to recede from the bold headlines, slowly fading into the collective memory's distant, painful corners. In a profound and heartbreaking sense, the victims of the Freeway Phantom, their stories unfinished, their futures stolen, were quietly and tragically folded into the shamefully long list of unsolved murders that haunted the annals of Washington, D.C., their cases becoming cold files in dusty archives, their killer still a nameless, faceless specter of evil, his reign of terror and unresolved wound in the heart of the city. As the years inexorably passed, the dedicated detectives who had poured their lives into the Freeway Phantom case eventually retired from service or were compelled to move on to other roles within law enforcement. With the crippling absence of any centralized case file system, a fundamental flaw that had plagued the investigation from its inception, an immeasurable amount of critical information, vital documentation, and hard-won institutional knowledge was irretrievably lost. Original files, once the bedrock of the investigation, became increasingly scattered across various departments and individual offices, turning into fragmented remnants. Many were left incomplete, their narratives broken, or, most tragically, simply disappeared altogether, swallowed by the bureaucratic abyss. This profound disorganization, a systemic failure of record-keeping, when combined with the severe limitations of forensic technology available at the time, would prove to be the ultimate impediment, relentlessly stalling any significant progress and condemning the case to a frustrating limbo. Throughout the long, agonizing years of the investigation, several individuals had indeed been considered as potential suspects, their names briefly emerging from the shadows of suspicion. Among them were the deeply disturbing serial offender Robert Oskins, whose violent history and chilling linguistic quirk offered a tantalizing, albeit ultimately unsubstantiated, link. The members of the brutal Green Vega rapists gang also came under intense scrutiny, their modus operandi mirroring certain aspects of the Phantom's cruelty. Yet, despite these promising leads and the relentless efforts of countless investigators, no one was ever formally charged in connection with the horrific string of Freeway Phantom murders. Each path pursued, each door knocked upon, eventually led to a dead end, leaving the central mystery infuriatingly intact. By the early 1980s, nearly a decade after the initial wave of terror, the Freeway Phantom case had, for all intents and purposes, gone completely cold. Its once urgent files now sat gathering dust in forgotten corners, a testament to unsolved horror. The elusive killer who had terrorized the streets of Washington, D.C., and brutally taken the lives of at least 6 young girls between 1971 and 1972, had achieved the impossible. He had vanished without a trace, a spectral figure in the annals of crime. There were no new victims, no more chilling notes left behind as taunts, no further signs of his malevolent presence. The phantom had become just that, a phantom, leaving behind only grief, unanswered questions, and a profound, aching silence that continues to echo through the city's history, a chilling reminder of a predator who simply disappeared into the ether, his true identity remaining one of America's most haunting and persistent unsolved mysteries, a permanent cliffhanger in the lives of the victims' families. And perhaps most haunting of all, an enduring testament to the profound failures of justice, there was never a definitive, conclusive answer about who was truly responsible for these heinous acts. More than 5 long, agonizing decades have now passed since the Freeway Phantom first began his chilling spree, preying on the vibrant, innocent young black girls of Washington, D.C., and still, the identity of the elusive killer remains stubbornly unknown. His name, his face, his true story, all are shrouded in an impenetrable veil of mystery, a permanent, tormenting question mark hanging over the city. The case has undeniably cemented its place as one of the most haunting and persistently unsolved serial murders in the annals of American history. Its enduring impact stems not only from the sheer brutality of the crimes themselves, the shocking violence visited upon children, but perhaps even more profoundly, from what it starkly revealed about whose lives are truly prioritized, whose cries for justice are amplified, and whose are quietly diminished when the scales of justice are precariously balanced. Each of the victims, Carol, Darlenia, Brenda Crockett, Nemoshia, Diane, and Brenda Woodward, was not merely a name on a police report, each was a unique, budding personality, a young girl full of vibrant promise, with dreams shimmering on the horizon. They each had devoted families who loved them fiercely, communities who grieved them with a raw, enduring sorrow, and futures that were cruelly and irrevocably stolen in the most horrific and senseless way imaginable. Their absence left an aching void that time has not, and cannot, fully heal. Yet, the collective response to their murders, characterized by fragmented investigations across jurisdictional lines, the tragic loss of critical files and documentation due to systemic disorganization, and a litany of painfully missed opportunities for apprehension, also tells a story far larger than the crimes themselves. It is a damning narrative of systemic neglect, a quiet yet profound injustice rooted in a societal indifference that allowed a monster to operate with impunity, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and a chilling legacy. The unresolved fate of the Freeway Phantom serves as a stark, enduring indictment, a haunting reminder that true justice, for some, remains an elusive phantom itself, forever just beyond reach. The echo of their stolen lives is a permanent, unresolved chord in the symphony of American history, a cliffhanger of anguish that continues to resonate across generations. It is a profoundly painful and indelible reminder that, far too often, when the victims of unspeakable violence are young black girls, society at large frequently fails to demonstrate the same urgent commitment, the same righteous outrage, and the same unyielding determination to pursue answers and deliver justice that is readily extended to other demographics. This tragic disparity in response speaks volumes, echoing a systemic neglect that compounded the initial horror of the crimes. Today, the names of the Freeway Phantom's victims, Carol, Darlenia, Brenda, Nemoshia, Diane, and Brenda, are indeed etched into history, but not in the way they deserved. Their names should have been celebrated for their vibrant lives, remembered for their potential, and spoken in the context of justice achieved. Instead, they linger as symbols of unresolved sorrow, their stories overshadowed and diminished by the cacophony of political scandals like Watergate, by repeated investigative missteps that crippled progress, and by a tragically fading public interest that ultimately allowed their cases to languish. Their families, enduring a raw and ceaseless grief, never received the closure of justice, never witnessed the apprehension and accountability of the monstrous individual who stole their loved ones. And somewhere out there, lurking in the anonymity of the past, if not already claimed by the passage of time and the quiet decay of mortality, is a person who cunningly evaded capture, a phantom who got away with murder. This individual was a master of stealth, someone who knew precisely how to move in unnerving silence, leaving no incriminating fingerprints or definitive forensic clues to betray his identity. He was a predator who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the profound emptiness of his heinous acts. The question, then, remains hauntingly suspended in the air, a chilling cliffhanger that reverberates through the decades. Did he ever truly stop his monstrous acts, his dark urges finally sated or subdued by age? Or did the world, in its vast, indifferent complexity, simply stop looking, allowing a terrifying serial killer to disappear into the annals of history, his final chapter unwritten, his legacy of terror an eternal, unresolved mystery? Their names, Carol, Darlenia, Brenda Crockett, Neomoshio Yates, Diane Williams, and Brenda Woodward, demand to be remembered, not merely as a tragic list of victims, but as vibrant daughters, cherished sisters, and deeply loved individuals whose promising lives were cruelly and irrevocably stolen. Each name represents a universe of unfulfilled potential, a symphony of dreams silenced far too soon. The Freeway Phantom, the embodiment of an unspeakable evil, may have successfully vanished into the cold anonymity of history, his identity remaining a stubborn enigma, but the profound, agonizing pain and indelible trauma he inflicted upon families and an entire community have never dissipated. That sorrow lingers, a pervasive, unhealed wound. And until the day that definitive answers finally emerge, until the truth of who he was and why he committed such monstrous acts is laid bare, the poignant voices of these innocent girls, though silenced in life, will continue to echo through the corridors of time. Their stories, entwined with the lingering scientific questions and the tantalizing, unresolved clues surrounding their cases, will persist as a haunting testament to an enduring injustice. May Carol, Darlenia, Brenda Crockett, Neomoshio, Diane, and Brenda Woodward finally find the peace that was so violently denied to them in life, a peace earned through memory and the enduring hope for ultimate truth. The search for closure, for answers, for the phantom himself, continues to resonate through the decades, a profound and unresolved chapter in the nation's history, a somber cliffhanger that calls out for resolution.